Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan has dropped out of the presidential race. Ryan's campaign lasted 7 months. He announced he will be running for re-election for Ohio's 13th congressional district. Ryan said he's proud of what his campaign accomplished.
We've given voice to the forgotten communities and the forgotten people in the United States. And while it didn't work out quite the way we planned, this voice will not be stifled. I will continue to advocate and fight for the working people of this country.
I want to bring in Ed O'Keefe now. He is our CBS News political correspondent. Hi, Ed. So what did Tim Ryan focus his campaign on, and did he influence the overall race at all?
Oh, Tanya, how do we put this gently? This decision today is the political equivalent of a tree falling in the woods. And nobody really knowing about it. Look, Congressman Ryan is a well-respected member of the party, became more infamous a few years ago when he threatened to challenge, and actually did challenge, Speaker Pelosi for leadership of the House Democratic Caucus after they'd lost another round of elections. He tried to make the argument that a Midwestern moderate Democrat needs to be the guy who gets nominated by Democrats to win back the White House because he would be able to win back states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Well, guess what? There's at least 3 other moderates in the race who are doing a far better job of that, and 2 of them are from the Midwest. Pete Buttigieg of Indiana, Amy Klobuchar, Minnesota, Joe Biden from Delaware, born in Pennsylvania, makes a similar argument, and those 3 essentially occupy the moderate space. And Ryan otherwise has sort of sputtered for the last several months, not a factor in any of the early states, and certainly not at the national level. So he'll go home and run for re-election and continue as a congressman from Ohio, likely, come 2021.
All right, so moving on to some of the candidates still in the race. Former Vice President Joe Biden is recently contradicting some previous reporting, suggesting someone did raise concerns about the optics of having his son Hunter work for a Ukrainian gas company. Let's listen to what Biden said.
I never heard a thing. He never spoke to me. No one ever spoke to me, period. He may have said something to somebody else, but no one said anything to me. And no one ever said I said I didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it. And let's get something straight. My son did nothing wrong or illegal, period.
So how is the Biden campaign, Ed, responding to these repeated questions on the Ukraine scandal and things from Biden's political past? Will this campaign ever be able to put this story to bed?
Hard to say, unclear at this point, Tanya, but what I think the former vice president did there is essentially confirm what CBS and others have known for several weeks in regards to this situation, and that is that discussions with the former vice president when he was vice president and since he started his presidential campaign is a big no-go zone for aides, that they don't discuss family matters with him. And sure enough, what he's saying is, nobody discussed this with me. Well, yeah, nobody did, because they understood that to discuss issues involving his sons was an incredibly sensitive subject that none of them had the political capital to discuss with him. And so, in essence, this backs up what we've heard privately from campaign and former administration aides who said, we were kind of concerned about this, but we don't discuss it with him directly because to discuss family matters is verboten.
Yes, right. So, Ed, the Biden campaign also today softened its position on accepting support from super PACs. How are they explaining this apparent shift since Biden in the past had said he would not take their support?
Yeah, here again, you know, this is the political equivalent of being against guns but using a gun in a gunfight. The campaign today putting out a statement from the spokeswoman, Kate Bedingfield, saying in part, quote, "In this time of crisis in our politics, it is not surprising that those who are dedicated to defeating Donald Trump are organizing in every way permitted by current law to bring an end to his disastrous presidency." That is the Biden campaign winking, nodding, and nudging Biden supporters who are of means and saying, if you'd like to put together a super PAC that would advertise on our behalf and make us look good on the airwaves, we're not going to stop you. That will be met, and already has been met today, by criticism from some of his rivals, including Bernie Sanders, who said, latest example of Joe Biden and his fat cat donors essentially doing what they can to buy their way into the presidency. And while in recent cycles Democrats have done everything they can really to write off super PACs and say they're not necessary, this is an interesting acknowledgement, at least from the current polling frontrunner, that perhaps it's a tool that should be used by Democrats next year. And I suspect among primary voters especially, this will be greeted with great criticism. But here's the thing. we call him the polling frontrunner. By no means is he the fundraising frontrunner. He trails badly behind Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Mayor Buttigieg, only with about $9 million in the bank at the end of September when the quarterly fundraising reports were submitted. A bad sign for somebody who's trying to build a viable national campaign.
Well, some other sort of questionable signs. There's a new national poll from Quinnipiac out today showing Senator Elizabeth Warren leading over Joe Biden. It does show the opposite of a national poll released yesterday by CNN that showed Biden with the lead over Warren. So we know that these are national polls, Ed, and not the more telling state polls. But what should we take away from them?
And also, of course, polls of different people. So there's no good way to measure the same group of people necessarily. What it shows is that essentially Biden and Warren lead this thing, and that very few others are even near them in contention. With now 18 candidates left, really only 3 others, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, and Kamala Harris, depending on the survey, get anywhere near them, but trail badly. So we'll wait and see. This continues to be a name ID competition, basically, between the two of the 3 best known, with Bernie Sanders slipping back. And you look at some surveys at national level and at the state level, Pete Buttigieg is slipping up into 3rd. So essentially, you're looking at a 4, 5, maybe 6-person race right now still, with everybody else essentially a non-factor.
And that new Quinnipiac poll also helped Senator Amy Klobuchar meet the requirements to qualify for the November debate. There are now 9 candidates who have qualified. Can we expect any more?
We'll see. You have 9, which is essentially Biden, Warren, Sanders, Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Andrew Yang. You throw in Klobuchar now. The 3 that are on the bubble who have met the fundraising requirement, meaning they've raised enough money from the minimum number of people, are Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, Beto O'Rourke of Texas, and Julian Castro of Texas. But those 3 have so far failed to get enough polls that show them hitting at least 3% nationally or 5% in a certain number of state polls. They have until November 13th to make it happen. We'll see if they do it.
Now, you mentioned earlier, Pete Buttigieg rising. A new state poll in Iowa found him going up the polls. The Iowa State University poll has him in 2nd place, with Elizabeth Warren keeping her lead. How is Buttigieg's campaign spinning this?
Well, and this is where it can be dangerous talking about surveys of a different flavor and different methodology. What's interesting, as I talked to our polling director, Anthony Salvanto, today about this, Iowa State is doing a survey that goes back to the same exact group of people repeatedly until the caucus to get a sense of how their preferences may have changed.
Right.
We do this in our battleground tracker polling to some extent in the first 18 states that hold contests up to Super Tuesday. So if anything, what this poll may tell us is that going back to the same pool of people repeatedly is either a good or bad way to measure who ultimately wins.
Right.
Buttigieg, of course, will crow about this, as they are already, but this is not a survey that counts towards your debate qualifications, A, and B, it's a different, new, and potentially proper or improper way of surveying caucus goers ahead of the race on February 3rd.
Fascinating stuff, these polls. All right, Ed O'Keefe, we thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.